In Geneva's gleaming corporate towers, a brilliant aerospace engineer was about to lose everything she'd built. What started as the final negotiations for history's largest satellite deal took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her boss's ultimate betrayal. Isabel Thornton wasn't your typical corporate negotiator. For 8 years, she had spent her life architecting the world's most sophisticated satellite network, known for her ability to bridge impossible technical and political divides. When she discovered Marcus Richardson fabricating ethics violations to destroy her career, she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy that threatened global infrastructure itself, and her response would plunge 7 countries into digital darkness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wall of monitors in Conference Room Alpha cast an ethereal blue glow across Isabel Thornton's face, so she adjusted her headset for the 14th time that morning. 7 different time zones were represented on the screens. Before her, Tokyo at 11:47 p.m., Washington at 10:47 a.m., each displaying the carefully composed faces of ministers, aerospace directors, and telecommunications officials who held the future of global communications in their collective hands. Thornton came the precise voice of Hiroshi Tanaka from the Tokyo feed. We remain concerned about the orbital positioning protocols for sectors 7 through 12. The proximity to existing Japanese commercial satellites could create interference patterns. That I understand your concern. Director Tanaka, Isabel interrupted gently, her fingers dancing across her tablet to pull up the relevant schematics. Behind her she could feel Marcus Richardson's presence like a storm cloud, though she didn't turn around. He'd been hovering for the past hour, occasionally clearing his throat, or shifting papers in what she'd learned to recognize as his passive-aggressive attempts to derail her focus. 8 years. 8 years of sleepless nights, of calculations that filled whiteboards in her apartment, of building relationships with engineers and bureaucrats across 7 countries. 8 years of designing not just a satellite network, but the delicate diplomatic architecture needed to make it reality. The $2.6 billion global communications infrastructure project wasn't just the largest deal in GSS history, it would fundamentally reshape how the world stayed connected. If I may, Isabel continued, sharing her screen to display a complex orbital diagram that looked like a 3-dimensional spiderweb of trajectories and zones, the interference concern actually becomes our greatest asset. By implementing a synchronized orbital dance, forgive the informal terminology, we can use the gravitational interactions between our satellites and yours to create a more stable communication grid. She watched Tanaka's eyebrows rise as he absorbed the implications. Elena Miller from the German Space Agency leaned forward in her own feed, her engineering background allowing her to grasp the elegance of the solution faster than the politicians. You're suggesting we use orbital resonance as a feature, not a bug, Miller said, a smile creeping across her face. Brilliant. But the precision required for such synchronization is well within our capabilities, Isabel finished. In fact, it's safer than traditional spacing methods, because any deviation from the planned trajectories would naturally correct itself through gravitational assistance. It's like, imagine if tightrope walkers could lean on each other for balance instead of struggling alone. Behind her, Richardson's chair scraped against the floor, a sound she'd come to dread. Thornton. His voice carried that particular tone of barely contained authority. Perhaps we should discuss the technical details in our internal review before presenting them to our international partners. Heat crept up Isabel's neck, but she kept her expression neutral for the camera. 7 faces looked back at her from the monitors, some confused by the interruption, others clearly irritated by what appeared to be internal disagreement during crucial negotiation. Marcus, she said carefully, using his first name deliberately to remind everyone watching that this was her project, her expertise. I believe our partners would appreciate transparency in our problem-solving process. These gentlemen and ladies have been working with me for 3 years developing these protocols. A moment of silence stretched across continents. Then Tanaka spoke, his diplomatic training evident in every carefully chosen word. We do indeed appreciate Dr. Thornton's collaborative approach. The orbital resonance solution addresses our primary concerns. Japan is prepared to approve this segment of the proposal. One by one, the other delegates voiced their agreement: Germany, France, Brazil, Canada, South Korea, Australia. Isabel felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came with solving complex problems, with building bridges between competing interests and technical constraints. Excellent, she said, making notes on her tablet. That brings us to the data encryption standards for cross-border traffic. I know this has been a sensitive point, particularly regarding Richardson's hand landed heavily on her shoulder. I think we should take a 15-minute recess, he announced to the screens. Technical consultation. The delegates murmured their agreement, though Isabel caught several exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd witnessed Richardson's micromanagement. As the feeds went dark one by one, she swiveled her chair to face her boss, keeping her expression carefully neutral. Marcus Richardson at 52 was everything a corporate senior vice president was supposed to look like: silver-haired, expensively suited, possessing the kind of effortless authority that came from years of climbing corporate ladders. But Isabel had learned to read the tells: the way his jaw tightened when he felt threatened, the slight tremor in his left hand when he was lying, the forced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed. His corporate veneer slipped. "Orbital resonance. You're changing fundamental aspects of the proposal without authorization." "I'm solving problems," Isabel replied, standing to match his height. "Isn't that what you pay me for?" The resonance solution is superior to our original design and addresses 3 separate technical objections from our partners. It's good engineering and good diplomacy. It's deviation from approved protocols. Richardson moved closer, lowering his voice. "Every change needs to go through proper channels. I need real-time updates on every decision, every technical modification, every conversation with international partners." Isabel studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the way his hands fidgeted with his phone. In 8 years of working together, she'd never seen him this agitated about technical details. Richardson was a business executive, not an engineer. He typically trusted her expertise and focused on the financial and political aspects of deals. "Marcus, what's really going on here? You've been second-guessing every decision for weeks. These are routine technical adjustments, the kind we've made hundreds of times before." For a moment, something flickered across his expression: fear, guilt. Then the corporate mask slammed back into place. "What's going on is that I'm responsible for this project's success," he said. $2.6 billion, Isabel, 7 governments. If anything goes wrong, it's my head on the chopping block, not yours. She wanted to point out that her name was the one on every technical specification, her reputation that had convinced international partners to trust GSS with their communications infrastructure. Instead, she nodded. "I understand the pressure, but you need to trust me to do my job. These partners know me. They trust my judgment. When you override me in front of them, fine." Richardson stepped back, checking his watch. "But I want detailed reports on every technical modification, real-time updates on all communications with international partners, and no more surprise solutions. Everything gets vetted internally first." Isabel bit back her first 3 responses, all of which would have been career-limiting. As Richardson left the conference room, Isabel returned to her tablet to review notes for the encryption discussion. The device prompted her for her security credentials, routine for accessing sensitive negotiation files. She entered her password and watched the authentication sequence begin, then froze. The security log showed 4 unauthorized access attempts to her files in the past 24 hours. Failed login attempts using sophisticated attack patterns that suggested professional-grade intrusion software. Someone with significant resources was trying to break into her negotiation files. Isabel's mind raced through the implications. Corporate espionage wasn't uncommon in high-stakes international deals, but these attempts were different: too targeted, too sophisticated. They weren't random phishing expeditions, but focused attacks on her specific files, her specific access credentials. Her fingers moved across the tablet, pulling up deeper security logs, tracing the attack patterns. The intrusion attempts had come from inside GSS's own network. Someone inside the company was trying to steal her work. As the international delegates began reconnecting for the second half of the session, Isabel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. The unauthorized access attempts weren't just about stealing information, they were about understanding her work well enough to potentially replace her. The wall of monitors flickered back to life, 7 expectant faces waiting for her to continue the negotiations that would reshape global communication. But now, as Isabel looked into those screens, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her just as intently from much closer to home. The encryption discussion could wait. She had a more immediate security breach to investigate. But 24 hours later, as Isabel sat in her office reviewing the final contract modifications before tomorrow's signing ceremony, the security breach became the least of her concern. The door to her office burst open without warning, and Marcus Richardson strode in flanked by 2 GSS security officers and a woman Isabel didn't recognize, severe-looking, carrying a briefcase like a weapon. Thornton. Richardson's voice carried an official coldness that made her stomach drop. We need to discuss some serious irregularities that have come to our attention. Isabel saved her work and swiveled her chair to face them, her engineer's mind automatically cataloging details. Richardson's hands were steady now, none of the nervous fidgeting from yesterday. The unknown woman wore expensive clothes but practical shoes. Lawyer, definitely. The security officers looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. What kind of irregularities? Isabel asked, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. The woman stepped forward, opening her briefcase with practiced efficiency. I'm Sandra Hayes from GSS Legal. We've discovered evidence that you've been sharing confidential technical specifications with unauthorized external parties. She placed a tablet on Isabel's desk, the screen displaying what appeared to be email logs and file transfer records. Isabel leaned forward to examine them, her heart racing as she recognized her own login credentials and timestamp data that seemed to show her accessing and transferring sensitive satellite specifications to unknown recipients. This is impossible, Isabel said, her voice sharper than intended. I never sent these files. These logs have been fabricated. The digital forensics are quite clear, Hayes replied, her tone suggesting she'd heard such denials before. These transfers occurred from your secure terminal using your personal access code. The recipients include entities with known connections to foreign intelligence services. Isabel's mind raced through the implications. The unauthorized access attempts she'd discovered yesterday. Someone hadn't been trying to steal her file. They'd been studying her access patterns, her workflow, her digital fingerprints, preparing to frame her. Show me the full metadata, she demanded, reaching for the tablet. If these are genuine transfers, there will be corresponding network traffic logs, backup verification protocols, secondary authentication records. Richardson's hand slammed down on the tablet before she could touch it. Dr. Thornton, the evidence is conclusive. More importantly, your betrayal of company trust and potentially national security makes your continued employment impossible. Betrayal, the word came out as a whisper. 8 years of her life, 8 years of building relationships, designing systems, solving impossible problems. Marcus, you know me. You know I would never. I know that someone with your level of access and expertise represents a significant security risk when they've been compromised. Richardson interrupted. His eyes held something that might have been regret, but his voice remained coldly professional. Effective immediately, your employment with Global Satellite Solutions is terminated for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The room tilted slightly, as if the artificial gravity of her corporate world had suddenly shifted. The signing ceremony is tomorrow. 7 countries are depending on this project. You can't possibly think the project will proceed under new leadership, Hayes interjected, producing a thick folder of documents. These are the terms of your immediate termination. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items under security supervision. All access to GSS systems, facilities and personnel is revoked. Any attempt to contact international partners or discuss proprietary information will result in federal prosecution. Isabel stood slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. Through her office window, she could see the Geneva headquarters bustling with activity, engineers preparing final technical documentation, lawyers reviewing contract language, diplomatic liaisons, coordinating with international partners, her project, her life's work, continuing without her. I need to see the full forensic analysis, she said, grasping for anything that might make sense of this nightmare. If someone is framing me, the evidence will show. The evidence shows that you've betrayed your country and your company, Richardson said, and now she could hear something beneath the official coldness: satisfaction, relief. Ms. Hayes will escort you to collect your belongings. The next 30 minutes passed in a surreal haze. Security officers watched as she packed 8 years of awards, personal photos and mementos into a cardboard box. Colleagues she'd worked with for years avoided eye contact as she walked past their desk. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like a descent into professional purgatory. As the elevator doors opened to the dim concrete of the underground garage, Isabel heard footsteps echoing behind her. She turned to see a woman she didn't recognize, mid-30s, athletic build, carrying herself with the confident stride of someone accustomed to pursuing difficult stories. Dr. Thornton, the woman approached cautiously, as if dealing with a startled animal. I'm Elena Rodriguez, investigative journalist with TechWatch International. I wonder if I could speak with you about what just happened upstairs. Isabel's laugh came out bitter. You work fast. The termination was 30 minutes ago. I've been investigating GSS for 3 months, Elena said, her dark eyes intense with interest. Irregularities in their international contracts, unusual financial flows, connections to entities that don't quite add up. When I saw you being escorted out by security, I thought there might be a connection. I'm not talking to reporters, Isabel said, shifting her box of belongings. I have enough legal problems without adding media speculation. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice. Dr. Thornton, I know about the unauthorized access attempts to your files. I know about the strange financial transfers involving GSS board members, and I know that firing the lead engineer 24 hours before the biggest satellite deal in history makes no sense unless someone wanted you gone. Isabel froze. How do you know about the access attempts? Because I've been tracking digital breadcrumbs for months. Someone inside GSS has been very busy covering their tracks, but they left traces, financial records that don't match reported activity, communication patterns that suggest coordination with external entities. Elena pulled out her phone, showing Isabel a complex diagram of corporate connections and money flows. I think you were fired because you were getting too close to something someone didn't want you to see. For the first time since Richardson had walked into her office, Isabel felt something besides shock and betrayal. She felt the familiar analytical clarity that came with encountering a complex problem. You think this is about more than just my termination, she said slowly. I think your termination is about preventing you from discovering something much bigger, Elena replied. The question is whether you want to help me figure out what that is, or if you're going to let them bury you with fabricated evidence and destroyed reputation. Isabel looked around the parking garage, noting the security cameras, the corporate SUVs, the infrastructure of a company she'd devoted her adult life to building. Somewhere above them, Richardson was probably already briefing her replacement, spinning her termination as a necessary security measure. If I talk to you, Isabel said carefully, what kind of protection can you offer? Because if you're right about this being bigger than corporate politics, then I'm not just unemployed, I'm a target. Elena's smile held no humor. Dr. Thornton, I've been investigating corporate corruption for 15 years. I know how to protect sources, and I know how to expose the truth. But I need someone with inside knowledge, someone who understands the technical and financial aspects of what GSS has been doing. Isabel adjusted her grip on the cardboard box containing the remnants of her career. 8 years of work, 8 years of relationships, 8 years of building something that mattered, all destroyed in 30 minutes by fabricated evidence and corporate betrayal. But perhaps Elena was right. Perhaps this wasn't ending something. Perhaps it was the beginning of uncovering something much more important. I'll talk, Isabel said. but not here. Too many cameras, too many ears. Do you know somewhere secure? Elena nodded. I know exactly the place. And Dr. Thornton, bring any technical documentation you might have retained. Something tells me we're going to need all the evidence we can get. As they walked toward Elena's car, Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Behind them, the GSS building rose into the Swiss sky, its windows glowing with the light of ongoing business, ongoing betrayal, ongoing conspiracy. The real work was just beginning. 3 hours later, Isabel sat in her home office sanctuary, a converted bedroom in her Geneva apartment that had served as mission control for 8 years of satellite engineering. 6 monitors curved around her desk like a technological embrace, their screens dark and waiting. Satellite tracking equipment hummed quietly in custom-built cabinets, and secure communication systems that most government agencies would envy lined the walls. Elena had left her an hour ago, after documenting everything Isabel could remember about the financial irregularities and suspicious access patterns. Now alone with her thoughts and her technology, Isabel felt the full weight of what had been stolen from her settling like lead in her chest. Her fingers moved across the main keyboard, muscle memory guiding her through startup sequences she could perform blindfolded. One by one, the monitors flickered to life, displaying orbital trajectories, communication patterns, and data streams from the satellite network she'd spent her adult life designing. The beauty of it still took her breath away. Dozens of satellites dancing in precise formation around Earth, carrying the conversations, transactions, and connections that kept civilization functioning. Her satellites, her network, her life's work, now in the hands of people who had destroyed her reputation to steal it. The secure communication terminal chimed with an incoming message. James Patterson's avatar appeared on the screen, a thin, nervous-looking man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to see threats in every shadow. Izzy, his voice crackled through the encrypted channel. I heard what happened. Are you as secure as I can be from my own home, she replied, adjusting the camera angle. James, I need to know. Are you still monitoring the GSS security protocol? Patterson's paranoia had been a running joke during their 5 years working together, but it had also made him exceptionally good at building unhackable systems. His departure from GSS 2 years earlier, citing ethical concerns about corporate direction, had seemed overly dramatic at the time. Now it looked like prescience. I keep tabs on systems I helped build, he admitted, his eyes darting around his own screen as if checking for surveillance. Izzy, they're actively hunting for back doors for any access you might have retained. They know you're too smart to have left yourself completely locked out. They're right, Isabel said quietly. James, I need you to remember our conversation about fail-safes. The one we had after the Moscow incident 3 years ago. Patterson's face went pale. The dark protocol. Izzy, tell me you didn't actually implement it. Emergency authorization sequences for system-wide security lockdown, she recited from memory. Designed to prevent hostile takeover of critical infrastructure by parties acting against legitimate authority. You helped me design the encryption. That was theoretical. Patterson's voice rose an octave, a thought experiment about protecting infrastructure from foreign attack. Not corporate espionage and treason. Isabel interrupted. James, I've been fired based on fabricated evidence. Someone inside GSS has been selling our technical specifications to foreign entities. The entire network is compromised. She pulled up her analysis of the unauthorized access attempts, the data flows Elena had shown her, the pattern of corporate betrayal that had destroyed her career. Patterson's eyes widened as he absorbed the implications. Even if you're right, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, the dark protocol would shut down global communications. Internet infrastructure, emergency services, financial networks, everything that depends on satellite connectivity. Millions of people would be affected. Millions of people are already being affected by corporate treason. Isabel replied. They just don't know it yet. Her fingers moved across secondary keyboards, calling up deep-level access protocols she'd embedded in the satellite network's core systems years earlier. Hidden pathways that bypassed normal security, designed to function even if all her official access was revoked. The screens filled with system status displays, orbital trajectories and communication flow patterns. "Izzy, don't do this," Patterson pleaded. "There has to be another way." Legal channels, official investigations. Legal channels. Isabel's laugh held no humor. "They fired me with fabricated evidence and threatened federal prosecution if I even try to contact the international partners I've been working with for years. The official investigation would be run by the same people who orchestrated my termination." She thought about Elena's words in the parking garage, about corporate corruption that left digital breadcrumbs and financial records that didn't add up. About someone wanting her gone badly enough to risk destroying an 8-year project just 24 hours before completion. "They made a mistake, James. They got rid of me, but they didn't get rid of my access. And they have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm truly angry." The main display showed the satellite network's current configuration, a beautiful web of connections spanning the globe. Each satellite was a node in humanity's nervous system, carrying data that kept the world functioning. With a few keystrokes, she could make it all go dark. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The Dark Protocol isn't about revenge," she said, her voice growing steadier as her resolve hardened. "It's about forcing the truth into the open. When the satellites go down, everyone will demand answers. They'll investigate. They'll discover what Richardson and whoever is behind him have been doing. Or they'll blame you for an act of terrorism," Patterson countered. "Izzy, think about this. Really think. Once you activate the protocol, there's no going back. You'll be the most wanted person on the planet." Isabel's hands paused over the keyboard. She thought about her father, the NASA engineer who had taught her that technology should serve humanity, not the powerful few who sought to exploit it. She thought about 8 years of work, of relationships built with international partners who trusted her expertise and integrity. She thought about Richardson's satisfaction as he destroyed her career to cover his own crime. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "doing the right thing means accepting the consequences." Her fingers found the keys that would initiate the shutdown sequence. Deep in the satellite network's core systems, dormant code began to awaken. Protocols she'd written during sleepless nights, imagining scenarios where the infrastructure she'd built might be turned against the people it was meant to serve. "James, I need you to understand something. This isn't about revenge or anger. It's about protecting what we built from people who would use it to serve foreign interests instead of global communication. The Dark Protocol was always meant to be a reset button, a way to force accountability when the system itself became corrupted." "And if you're wrong?" Patterson asked. "If this destroys more than it protects," Isabel looked at the orbital display at the satellites she'd positioned with mathematical precision to serve 7 countries and hundreds of millions of people. "In a few hours they would begin going dark, one by one as her hidden protocol propagated through their systems. Then I'll face the consequences," she said. "But I won't let them steal our work and use it against everything we believed we were building." Her finger hovered over the final authorization key. Once pressed, the Dark Protocol would begin its inexorable countdown. Satellite communications would fail across multiple continents. Global commerce would stutter. Emergency services would scramble for backup systems. The world would demand answers. And perhaps in the chaos that followed, the truth would finally have room to breathe. "Activation confirmed," she whispered, and pressed the key. In orbit above Earth, invisible signals began propagating through the satellite network. The countdown had begun. In orbit above Earth, invisible signals began propagating through the satellite network. The countdown had begun. 12 hours later, the first domino fell at 3:47 a.m., Tokyo time. Isabel watched from her apartment as the orbital display showed GSS-7 going dark. its communication arrays systematically shutting down as the dark protocol reached its core systems. Within minutes, internet connectivity across Southeast Asia began fragmenting. Banking networks stutter. Emergency dispatch centers found their backup communication links failing one by one. She had programmed the shutdown to cascade gradually, not a sudden blackout that might cause catastrophic accidents, but a rolling failure that would force the world to pay attention. Each satellite would go dark at precisely calculated intervals, creating a pattern that screamed intentional action rather than system failure. On her secondary monitor, news feeds began flooding in from around the globe. CNN's international desk was trying to maintain broadcast as their satellite uplinks failed. The BBC's correspondent in Bangkok stood in front of a map showing communication dead zones spreading across Thailand and Malaysia. Financial markets that had opened in Auckland were already experiencing massive volatility as trading algorithms lost their data feeds. Isabel's stomach churned as she watched the real-world consequences of her decision. A hospital in Singapore reporting delays in patient transfers due to communication failures. Air traffic control centers switching to outdated backup systems. Millions of people suddenly cut off from the digital infrastructure they'd taken for granted. Her secure terminal chimed with an incoming call from Patterson, his face pale with exhaustion and terror. "Izzy, what have you done?" His voice cracked with emotion. "The whole network is cascading. GSS 7, GSS 12 and GSS 15 are completely dark. The Philippines just declared a national emergency. The shutdown is proceeding exactly as designed," Isabel replied, though her voice sounded hollow even to herself. "Gradual, predictable, reversible. No permanent damage, just forced attention." Forced attention. Patterson's image flickered as his own connection struggled with the increasing network instability. "They're calling it an act of war. The president is being briefed. The UN Security Council is convening an emergency session. Izzy, they think this is a foreign attack." On her news feeds, Isabel could see the panic spreading as fast as the communication failures. Military bases going to high alert. Government officials being rushed to secure facilities. The fragile trust that held international cooperation together beginning to fracture as each nation wondered if they were under attack. At FBI headquarters in Washington, Agent David Walsh stared at the wall of monitors in the Cybercrime Division's Crisis Center. 24 hours ago, he'd been investigating routine financial fraud. Now he was leading the largest cybersecurity investigation in American history. "Sir," Agent Martinez called from across the room, "we've identified the attack vector. The shutdown commands are propagating through hidden protocols embedded in the satellite network's core systems. This isn't external hacking. Someone with administrative access to the entire network is doing this deliberately." Walsh studied the technical analysis flowing across his screen. The shutdown was too precise, too systematic to be anything but intentional, but the sophistication required to embed such protocols in a global satellite network suggested either a state actor or someone with unprecedented access to the systems. "Any idea who has that level of access?" Walsh asked. "According to Global Satellite Solutions, fewer than a dozen people worldwide could execute something like this," Martinez replied. "We're running background checks on all of them." "But sir, there's something else. GSS fired their lead systems engineer yesterday, Isabel Thornton. The timing is suspicious." Walsh felt the familiar tingle of a case breaking open. "Get me everything on Dr. Thornton. Employment records, financial data, travel patterns, communication logs, and get me a team ready to move. If she's responsible for this, we need to find her before the satellites take down half the world's communication infrastructure." 3,000 miles away at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado, General Robert Hayes stood before a room full of military officers and aerospace engineers, trying to make sense of an unprecedented crisis. "General," Colonel Stevens reported, "the shutdown pattern suggests a systematic attack on global communication infrastructure. If this continues, We'll lose military satellite communications over the Pacific within 6 hours. Hayes studied the orbital display showing the spreading pattern of dark satellites. His 40 years of military experience had taught him to recognize the difference between random failures and coordinated attacks. This was definitely the latter. What's our assessment of foreign involvement? Hayes asked. Russia, China, North Korea. That's where it gets interesting, sir, Colonel Stevens replied. The attack vectors are coming from inside the satellite network itself. These aren't external intrusions. Someone with legitimate access is shutting down the system from within. A mole? Corporate espionage? Possibly, but sir, there's something else. The shutdown pattern isn't random. It's designed to minimize collateral damage while maximizing global attention. Whoever is doing this wants the world to notice, but they don't want to cause catastrophic failure. Hayes frowned. In his experience, terrorists and foreign agents weren't typically concerned about minimizing civilian casualties. This felt different, more like a desperate cry for attention than an act of war. In Geneva, Marcus Richardson stood in GSS's crisis center, watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Victoria Chen paced behind him, her usual corporate composure cracking under the pressure. How is this possible? Chen demanded. We terminated Thornton. We revoked all her access. We swept the systems for back doors. Apparently we didn't sweep deep enough, Richardson replied grimly. She had administrative access for 8 years, plenty of time to hide protocols in places we'd never think to look. On the main display, the cascade of failures continued its relentless march across the globe. Each dark satellite represented millions in lost revenue, damaged relationships with international partners, and questions about GSS's ability to maintain critical infrastructure. We need to contact our international partners, Chen said carefully, aware that the crisis center was full of GSS employees who didn't know about their shadow dealing. They need to understand that this is temporary, that we can regain control. Richardson nodded. But privately he wondered if they could regain control. Thornton had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If she'd planned this shutdown, she'd planned for their response as well. Back in her apartment, Isabel watched the global reaction with a mixture of satisfaction and growing horror. The shutdown was working exactly as designed, forcing the world to pay attention, creating pressure for answers, disrupting the systems that Richardson and his conspirators had been exploiting. But she hadn't fully anticipated the human cost, the fear in people's voices as they lost connection with loved ones, the economic chaos as automated systems failed, the military posturing as nations prepared for what they perceived as acts of war. Her father had taught her that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. But what happened when the only way to protect humanity from corrupted technology was to temporarily break the technology itself? Patterson's face appeared on her secure terminal again, this time with tears in his eyes. Easy, please. I'm watching the news. People are terrified. They think we're under attack. There has to be another way. Isabel looked at her orbital display, watching the dark protocol continue its inexorable progress. In 4 hours, European satellites would begin failing. In 8 hours, the network disruption would reach North America. The cascade she'd initiated couldn't be stopped. She'd designed it that way to prevent Richardson from simply reversing her commands. James, she said quietly, sometimes you have to break something to save it. The network was already compromised, already being used against the people it was meant to serve. At least this way, when it comes back online, it'll be clean. And if the world doesn't forgive you for breaking it in the first place. Isabel stared at the screens showing global glows, at the panic she'd caused in pursuit of justice. Then I'll face the consequences. But Richardson and his people won't be able to hide behind corporate secrecy and fabricated evidence anymore. The whole world is watching now. As if summoned by her words, breaking news alerts began flooding her feeds, FBI announcing a manhunt for a domestic terrorism suspect. International task forces forming to investigate the satellite attack. And somewhere in that chaos, she hoped, investigators would start asking the right questions about why GSS's lead engineer had been fired just 24 hours before the network went dark. The dark protocol was work, but as Isabel watched the world react to her desperate gambit, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd unleashed something far more dangerous than she'd intended. 18 hours after activation, the hunt began in earnest. Agent David Walsh stood outside Isabel Thornton's Geneva apartment building at 6:23 a.m. local time, watching Swiss federal police secure the perimeter while his FBI team coordinated with Interpol agents. The morning air was crisp, but sweat beaded on his forehead as he processed the magnitude of the case. In his 15 years with the Bureau, he'd never led an investigation where the suspect's actions were being felt simultaneously across every continent. "Building's clear, sir," Agent Martinez reported through his earpiece. "Target is not present. Apartment appears to have been evacuated in a hurry." Walsh entered the building, his trained eye cataloging details as he climbed to the third floor. Isabel Thornton's apartment was a study in contrast, sparse personal belongings, but sophisticated technical equipment that would make most intelligence agencies envious. The converted bedroom that served as her office contained empty server racks and severed cable connections. Evidence of a hasty but methodical evacuation. "She knew we were coming," Walsh muttered, examining the precise way equipment had been removed. Nothing damaged, nothing left to chance. This wasn't panic, it was planning. On the kitchen table he found a manila envelope with Agent Walsh written in precise handwriting. Inside were copies of financial documents, security logs, and communication records, all pointing toward corporate espionage within Global Satellite Solutions. "Sir?" Martinez appeared in the doorway. "You need to see this." Walsh followed him to the office, where Martinez had discovered a hidden panel behind what appeared to be a bookshelf. Inside were additional documents and a single USB drive with a note attached. "The real criminals are still in the building across town. IT." Walsh studied the evidence, his investigator's instincts warring with his duty to apprehend a suspect who had crippled global communication. The documents suggested that Dr. Thornton might be a whistleblower rather than a terrorist, but the chaos her actions had caused couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, across Geneva at GSS headquarters, the crisis had reached fever pitch. Marcus Richardson stood in the emergency command center, fielding calls from government officials, military commanders, and international partners who demanded immediate restoration of satellite services. "Yes, Minister, I understand the economic impact," Richardson said into his secure phone, watching technicians scramble to regain control of systems they didn't fully understand. "We're working around the clock to resolve the situation." Victoria Chen approached with a grim expression. The forensics team found her access pathways. She embedded the shutdown protocols so deep in the core systems that they're nearly impossible to reverse without triggering additional safeguards. "How long until we can restore service?" "Conservative estimate, 72 hours. And that's assuming she doesn't have additional surprises waiting for us." Richardson felt his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. 8 years of building relationships, of positioning GSS as the world's premier satellite communications company, potentially destroyed by one brilliant engineer with a sense of justice and the technical skills to act on it. "What about our international partner?" Chen asked quietly, referring to their shadow dealings with foreign entities. "They're getting nervous. The exposure is too bright, too global. They want us to contain this quickly or they'll cut ties and disappear." Across town, Elena Rodriguez sat in a rented safe house, her laptop displaying multiple news feeds as she compiled the story that would either make her career or end it. The documents Isabel had provided painted a clear picture of corporate corruption, but the satellite shutdown had transformed their investigation from corporate malfeasance to potential terrorism. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the abandoned warehouse on Rue de la Navigation. Come alone." IT. Elena stared at the message, weighing the risks. Meeting with a fugitive suspected of cyber terrorism could end her career and possibly her freedom. But the story, the real story about corporate corruption and international espionage, was worth the risk. At Peterson's Space Force Base, General Hayes convened an emergency briefing with his senior staff. The satellite failures had reached European airspace, and military communications were beginning to suffer significant degradation. "General," Colonel Stevens reported, We've identified the suspect. Dr. Isabel Thornton, former lead engineer at Global Satellite Solutions. FBI has confirmed she's responsible for the shutdown. Hayes studied the biographical file on his screen. Doctorate from MIT, 8 years of exemplary service, daughter of a NASA engineer. Not the profile of a typical terrorist. What's her motive? Hayes asked. That's where it gets interesting, sir. She was terminated from GSS 24 hours before the shutdown, allegedly for security violations, but the timing suggests there might be more to the story, such as corporate espionage. Intelligence indicates GSS may have been compromised by foreign entities. If Dr. Thornton discovered this and was fired to keep her quiet, Hayes leaned back in his chair, processing the implication. You're suggesting she might be a whistleblower who chose extreme methods to expose corruption. It's possible, sir. The shutdown pattern supports this theory. It's designed to cause maximum attention while minimizing permanent damage. A terrorist would want to cause maximum harm. A whistleblower would want to force investigation. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat in her office at the International Space Communications Consortium, fielding angry calls from space agencies around the world. As the crisis deepened, she found herself thinking about Isabel Thornton, the brilliant young engineer she'd mentored, the daughter of her old NASA colleague. Her secure line rang, displaying a number she recognized but hadn't seen in months. Sarah, it's Isabel. I know you're probably required to report this call, but I need 5 minutes to explain what's really happening. Mitchell looked around her office, noting the recording equipment that monitored all official communications. Isabel, what have you done? The entire world is in chaos. The world was already in chaos, Sarah. They just didn't know it yet. GSS has been compromised. Richardson and his people have been selling our technical specifications to foreign entities while planning a hostile takeover of the company. I was fired because I was getting too close to the truth. Even if that's true, shutting down global communications isn't the answer. People are suffering, Isabel. Emergency services are compromised. Financial markets are crashing. I know. Isabel's voice carried the weight of guilt and determination in equal measure, but it was the only way to force the truth into the open. No one would have investigated corporate corruption at GSS while the system was functioning normally. Now they have to investigate. Mitchell closed her eyes, remembering the idealistic young engineer who had wanted to connect the world through technology. Where are you, Isabel? Let me help you. There might be a way to resolve this without destroying your life. I'm beyond help, Sarah, but you can help prevent this from happening again. When the investigations begin, and they will begin, make sure they ask the right questions about GSS's financial dealings and international partnerships. The evidence is there if people know where to look. The line went dead, leaving Mitchell staring at her phone. She thought about her duty to report the call, about her responsibility to international partners who trusted her judgment, but she also thought about the young woman she'd helped train, who had always put the mission above personal gain. Back in the abandoned warehouse, Isabel waited for Elena Rodriguez. While monitoring news feeds on her portable equipment, the global reaction was everything she'd expected, and worse, markets had lost trillions in value. Emergency services were struggling with backup systems. International tensions were rising as nations pointed fingers at each other, but buried in the chaos, she could see the investigation beginning to take shape. Questions about GSS's security, inquiries into her termination, demands for corporate transparency that Richardson and Chen couldn't ignore. Elena appeared in the warehouse doorway, moving cautiously through the shadows. Dr. Thornton, I got your message. Thank you for coming, Isabel replied, stepping into view. I know this puts you at risk. Why did you ask me here? The FBI is hunting you. You're wanted by every law enforcement agency on the planet, because you're the only journalist who was investigating GSS before the shutdown. You have the context to understand what's really happening here. Isabel handed Elena an encrypted drive. Everything's on there. Financial records, communication intercepts, technical specifications that prove the espionage. The real story isn't the satellite shutdown. It's the corporate treason that made the shutdown necessary. Elena pocketed the drive, her reporter's instincts warring with her survival instincts. Even if everything you're saying is true, You've caused a global crisis. Billions of people are affected by your actions. Billions of people were already being affected by corporate corruption. They just didn't know it. Isabel replied. The satellite network was being prepared for hostile takeover by foreign entities. Better a temporary shutdown than permanent compromise, and if the world doesn't see it that way. Isabel looked out the warehouse window at the Geneva skyline, where GSS headquarters rose like a monument to corporate power. Then I'll face the consequences, but at least the truth will be out there. Sometimes, Elena, you have to choose between being safe and being right. I chose right. As sirens began wailing in the distance, whether for her or just the general chaos, Isabel couldn't tell. She knew the hunt was accelerating. Soon, very soon, she would have to choose between surrender and escalation. The truth was spreading, but so was the manhunt. The question was which would reach the tipping point first. The safe house in Arlington felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Isabel stared at the wall of monitors Patterson had assembled, each screen displaying fragments of the digital chaos she'd unleashed 48 hours ago. Stock tickers showed markets still hemorrhaging billions. News feeds cycled through footage of stranded aircraft, dark emergency centers, and frustrated officials demanding answers. The weight of those consequences pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making each breath deliberate and measured. The Singapore hub is still dark, Patterson murmured from his corner workstation, his fingers dancing across 3 keyboards simultaneously. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually pristine appearance had devolved into wrinkled clothes and unwashed hair. But I'm seeing improvised workarounds through the Indian Ocean Relay Network. They're adapting faster than we anticipated. Isabel nodded absently, her attention split between monitoring the global response and crafting the encrypted message that would either save her mission or destroy any remaining credibility she possessed. Sarah Mitchell, her father's old colleague, her mentor, the woman who'd guided her through her first international negotiation, represented the last bridge between Isabel's actions and the legitimate channels of power. If Sarah wouldn't listen, if she couldn't see past the obvious criminality to the underlying truth, then Isabel truly was alone. The secure communication channel chimed softly. Sarah's face appeared on the monitor, her silver hair perfectly arranged, despite the early morning hour in Brussels. Even through the encrypted connection, Isabel could see the strain in her mentor's eyes, the weight of fielding calls from 7 angry governments demanding explanations for the satellite failures. Sarah's voice carried decades of diplomatic experience, carefully neutral despite the circumstances. I have to ask, are you safe? For now. Isabel leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The satellite shutdown wasn't an attack. It was a protection protocol. Richardson and Chen have been selling our technical specifications to foreign entities for months. They fired me because I was getting too close to discovering their operation. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Isabel caught the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tell that indicated her mentor was processing information rather than dismissing it. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? Patterson's fingers flew across his keyboard, uploading encrypted files to their shared drive. Financial records, he said without looking away from his screens, communication intercepts, technical logs showing unauthorized data transfer. Richardson's been using shell companies to funnel information to 3 different competing firms, including one with direct ties to Beijing. The timing wasn't coincidental, Isabel continued, watching Sarah's face for any sign of acceptance or rejection. They needed me gone before the final contract signing, because I would have noticed the security compromises they'd built into the system architecture. The ethics violation was fabricated. Sarah, every piece of evidence they presented was manufactured. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her diplomatic training warring with personal loyalty and professional skepticism. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not ready to accept it without verification, your response was extraordinarily destructive. Do you understand what you've done to international confidence in space-based infrastructure? The accusation hit harder than Isabel had expected. She'd spent years building those relationships, negotiating the delicate balance between national interests and collective benefit, that made international cooperation possible. Now she'd shattered that trust with a single decision, regardless of her motivations. I know, she whispered, but if I hadn't acted, they would have sold access to critical military and emergency communication networks. The damage they planned would have been permanent and invisible. At least my shutdown is reversible. Patterson looked up from his monitors, his face pale with exhaustion and stress. Sarah, I helped design those systems. Isabel's right about the vulnerabilities Richardson created. We're talking about backdoors that could have allowed foreign actors to manipulate emergency response communications during natural disasters or military operations. The shutdown looks destructive, but it prevented something much worse. Sarah studied them both through the encrypted connection, her experienced eyes searching for deception or self-justification. Finally, she sighed deeply. I've known you both for years. James, you called me after you left GSS, because you were concerned about the company's direction. Isabel, your father raised you to value truth above convenience. I can't ignore that history. Then you'll help us. Isabel felt a surge of hope tempered by caution. I'll listen to your evidence, and I'll arrange a meeting with someone who needs to hear this story. General Robert Hayes, Space Force Strategic Communications Command. He's been treating this as a potential act of war, but if you're right about the corporate conspiracy, he needs to understand the real threat. Across town, in GSS's executive conference room, Marcus Richardson was orchestrating his own alliance. Victoria Chen sat across from him, her tablet displaying real-time updates from their security contractors and government liaisons. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast harsh shadows across their faces, emphasizing the strain of the past 48 hours. Thornton's more resourceful than we anticipated, Chen said, scrolling through surveillance reports. She's avoided 3 attempted captures, and her digital footprint suggests sophisticated operational security. This isn't the socially awkward engineer we thought we were dealing with. Richardson loosened his tie, the careful composure he'd maintained during the press conferences beginning to crack. She's had help. Patterson disappeared the same day she activated the shutdown. They're working together, and they have access to technical resources we can't track. Then we escalate. Chen's voice carried the cold calculation that had made her successful in international finance. Our friends in Beijing are getting impatient. The satellite network was supposed to be fully compromised by now, not shut down entirely. They want access restored, and they want Thornton silenced permanently. The FBI agent, Walsh, he's asking uncomfortable questions about the ethics investigation. His requests for financial records are getting specific. Richardson's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. If he digs deep enough, he won't get the chance. Chen's interruption was sharp and final. I've arranged for additional pressure through proper channels. Walsh will be reassigned to a different case within 24 hours. Meanwhile, our private contractors have identified Thornton's probable location. This time they won't be attempting capture. The casual discussion of murder should have shocked Richardson, but he'd crossed too many lines to maintain illusions about Victoria Chen's method. Still, the reality of what they were planning settled over him like a weight. And if we're wrong, if killing her doesn't restore the satellites, Patterson knows the systems almost as well as she does. He'll cooperate once he understands the consequences of refusal. Chen's smile was predatory. One way or another, we regain control of the narrative and the network. The foreign interests we serve don't accept failure. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Elena Rodriguez was discovering the personal cost of investigative journalism in the digital age. She stood in her ransacked apartment, surveying the professional thoroughness of the break-in. They'd taken her backup drives, her research files, even personal photographs that might have contained location metadata. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed she kept her most sensitive material at home. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. Your reporting is attracting dangerous attention. If you want to live to publish the full story, meet at the coordinates attached. Come alone. A friend who knows the truth. Elena stared at the message, weighing professional skepticism against the very real threat represented by her destroyed apartment. The coordinates led to a public park in Bethesda, open enough to prevent ambush, busy enough to discourage violence. She grabbed her emergency bag, the one containing copies of everything important, and headed for the door. Agent David Walsh was also receiving pressure, though his came through official channels. His supervisor's call had been brief and unambiguous. Focus on capturing Isabel Thornton, stop investigating GSS corporate structure, hand over financial inquiries to the white-collar crime division. The reassignment was couched in terms of operational efficiency and resource allocation, but Walsh had spent enough time in federal law enforcement to recognize bureaucratic cover-up when he encountered it. He sat in his car outside GSS headquarters, watching the building where this had all started. His phone contained copies of the financial records he'd compiled before the official shutdown order, offshore accounts, suspicious transactions, foreign connections that painted a picture very different from the simple corporate terrorism narrative his superiors preferred. The smart career move would be to delete the files and focus on the manhunt. The right move, he was beginning to understand, might be something else entirely. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez, the journalist, whose reporting had been complicating the official narrative. Agent Walsh, I think we need to talk about GSS, about Isabel Thornton, and about why someone just tried to kill me. In the Arlington safe house, Isabel felt the weight of isolation beginning to lift as the network of allies slowly crystallized. Sarah's agreement to arrange the meeting with General Hayes represented the first crack in the wall of official hostility. Elena's survival and continued investigation meant the media pressure would continue building. Even Walsh's questioning of the corporate angle suggested cracks in the government's unified opposition. But Richardson and Chen weren't passive targets. They had resources, connections, and the desperate motivation of people with everything to lose. The game was becoming more dangerous, the stakes higher, and the margin for error smaller with each passing hour. Patterson looked up from his monitoring station, his face grave. Isabel, I'm seeing increased chatter on GSS, internal security channel. They're not just looking for us anymore. They're positioning assets for direct action. We need to assume they've moved beyond capture to elimination. Isabel nodded, her mind already shifting to the next phase of their operation. The evidence was gathering, the alliances were forming, but time was running out. Soon they would have to move from defensive maneuvering to direct confrontation. The question was whether their coalition of truth-tellers could survive long enough to expose the conspiracy before the conspirators silenced them forever. Outside, the Washington morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that promised new beginnings. But inside the safe house, surrounded by the evidence of corporate betrayal and the tools of digital warfare, Isabel Thornton prepared for a battle that would determine whether justice could triumph over institutional corruption, or whether the truth would die with those brave enough to speak it. The morning light filtering through the Pentagon's reinforced windows cast sharp geometric patterns across General Hayes's briefing room. Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat across from the career military officer, her diplomatic composure masking the gravity of what she was about to reveal. The evidence Patterson had compiled lay between them, in classified folders, financial records, communication intercepts, and technical documentation that painted a picture of corporate treason disguised as routine business. General, what I'm showing you changes everything about the satellite crisis, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Isabel Thornton isn't a terrorist. She's a whistleblower who prevented what would have been the largest compromise of critical infrastructure in American history. Hayes studied the documents with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions based on incomplete information. His weathered face revealed nothing as he absorbed Patterson's technical analysis, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes when he reached the foreign intelligence connections. These offshore accounts, Hayes said finally, tapping the financial record. Richardson and Chen were routing payments through shell companies in 3 different countries. The timing coincides exactly with major contract negotiations. James Patterson documented every unauthorized data transfer over the past 8 months. Sarah continued. They weren't just selling technical specifications. They were creating permanent backdoors into emergency communication networks. During natural disasters, terrorist attacks, military operations, foreign actors would have had the ability to manipulate or disable critical communication. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his military bearing unchanged but his perspective fundamentally shifted. And Thornton discovered this. She was getting close. The fabricated ethics violation was designed to remove her before she could expose the conspiracy during the final contract signing. Richardson needed her gone because she would have noticed the security vulnerabilities they'd deliberately engineered into the system architecture. Across the city, Elena Rodriguez was experiencing her own moment of truth. The meeting in Bethesda Park had connected her with Agent David Walsh, whose unofficial investigation had uncovered financial evidence that corroborated her months of reporting on GSS irregularity. They sat on a bench overlooking the Potomac, two professionals whose separate investigations had converged on the same shocking conclusion. Your apartment wasn't burglarized, Walsh said quietly, scanning the park for potential surveillance. It was professionally searched by people looking for specific information. The fact that they missed your off-site backup suggests they're working from incomplete intelligence about your operational security. Elena pulled out her tablet, displaying the encrypted files she'd received from an anonymous source 12 hours earlier. Someone wanted me to have the technical logs showing Richardson's communications with foreign entities, financial transfers that correlate exactly with major contract milestones, and something called Protocol 7 that appears to be instructions for maintaining hidden access to satellite control systems. Walsh studied the documents, his FBI training evident in how he cross-referenced details with his own investigation. This anonymous source, any theories about identity? Someone with high-level access to GSS internal systems who wants the truth exposed but can't come forward direct. The technical sophistication suggests either Thornton herself or someone working closely with her. Elena's journalistic instincts had been honed by years of protecting sources in dangerous situations. Whoever it is, they're taking enormous risks. Walsh's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his supervisor. The reassignment order was official. He had 6 hours to transfer all GSS-related materials to the White-Collar Crime Division and report for new assignment briefing. The bureaucratic machinery was moving to shut down his investigation. Elena, I need you to publish everything you have today. They're pulling me off the case, which means someone with significant influence wants this investigation buried. Walsh's decision crystallized in that moment. I'm going to give you copies of my financial analysis. If we don't get this information public immediately, it disappears forever. Meanwhile, in the Arlington safehouse, Patterson's fingers flew across multiple keyboards as he executed the most dangerous operation of his career. Breaking into GSS's secure servers from the outside required exploiting vulnerabilities he'd built into the system years earlier. Backdoors intended for emergency maintenance that had never been discovered or patched. Isabel, I'm in, he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. But I'm triggering security alerts across their entire network. We have maybe 10 minutes before they trace the intrusion back to this location. Isabel watched the data stream across their monitors, financial records showing the full scope of Richardson and Chen's operation, communication logs proving coordination with foreign intelligence services, and technical documentation revealing the planned compromise of military satellite networks. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, but obtaining it had just painted a target on their location. Download everything related to Protocol 7, Isabel instructed, her mind calculating escape routes and contingency plans. That's the smoking gun, proof that they weren't just selling information. They were creating permanent vulnerabilities in national security infrastructure. Patterson's screens flashed warning messages as GSS security systems detected the intrusion. Isabel, they're not just tracing the hack. They're activating something called Scorpion Protocol. I've never seen this in their systems before. The secure communication channel chimed with an incoming message from Sarah Mitchell. Isabel, General Hayes wants to meet. He's reviewed the evidence and agrees that this is corporate espionage rather than terrorism. But there's a complication. Richardson held a press conference an hour ago, claiming you're working with foreign terrorists to permanently damage American satellite infrastructure. On the wall monitors, news feeds showed Richardson's carefully orchestrated performance. Standing behind a podium bearing the GSS logo, he projected the image of a patriotic executive fighting to restore critical infrastructure, while dealing with a rogue employee who has clearly been radicalized by foreign influence. Isabel Thornton was terminated for legitimate ethics violations, Richardson declared to the assembled media. Her response was to activate dormant malware she had secretly installed in our satellite control system. We have evidence suggesting she has been in communication with hostile foreign entities, who provided technical assistance for this attack on American infrastructure. The lie was masterfully crafted, containing just enough technical detail to sound credible, while painting Isabel as a traitor rather than a whistleblower. Victoria Chen stood behind Richardson, her cold smile betraying satisfaction at how effectively they were controlling the narrative. Patterson's systems screamed warnings as corporate security traced their location. Isabel, we need to move now. Scorpion Protocol isn't just digital, they're dispatching physical assets to our location. Through the safe house windows, Isabel spotted unmarked vehicles taking positions around the building. These weren't FBI agents following official procedures. They were private contractors with no accountability to legal process or constitutional protection. James, grab the portable drives with everything we've downloaded. We're going mobile. Isabel's training in operational security, learned from years of negotiating in politically unstable regions, kicked in as she initiated emergency protocols they'd rehearsed but hoped never to use. As they prepared to evacuate, Elena Rodriguez's exposé was going live across multiple media platforms. Her article, The Satellite Conspiracy, How Corporate Greed Nearly Sold America's Infrastructure to Foreign Powers, laid out the complete story with supporting documentation that painted Richardson and Chen as traitors hiding behind corporate respectability. Agent Walsh, despite his official reassignment, was simultaneously transmitting copies of his financial investigation to congressional oversight committees and the Inspector General's office. The evidence was now beyond the reach of corporate suppression or bureaucratic burial. But Richardson and Chen weren't finished. As news of Elena's article spread, Victoria Chen activated the final phase of their contingency plan, one that would either discredit their accusers permanently or eliminate them entirely. In his Pentagon office, General Hayes was placing calls to Space Force command centers worldwide, ordering immediate security reviews of all satellite communication networks. The evidence Sarah Mitchell had presented demanded action, regardless of political pressure or corporate influence. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood a coalition of truth-tellers, risking everything to expose a conspiracy that threatened national security. On the other stood corporate conspirators with foreign backing, willing to use any means necessary to protect their operation and eliminate witnesses. As Isabel and Patterson fled the Arlington safe house through carefully planned escape routes, the final phase of their confrontation was beginning. The evidence was public, the alliances were formed, but the most dangerous moments lay ahead. Corporate treason had been exposed, but exposing truth and surviving to see justice were two very different challenges. The satellite crisis that had begun as Isabel's act of desperate revenge was becoming something larger, a test of whether institutional corruption could be defeated by individuals willing to risk everything for truth. The outcome would determine not just their survival but the future of critical infrastructure, security in an interconnected world where corporate loyalty and national interest had become dangerously misaligned. The basement of the abandoned warehouse in Baltimore stank of motor oil and desperation. James Patterson hung suspended from industrial chains, his wrists raw from struggling against restraints designed by people who understood pain as a professional tool. Blood trickled from his split lip where the lead interrogator, a man who'd introduced himself only as Mr. Gray, had demonstrated the consequences of uncooperative answers. Dr. Patterson, Gray's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone accustomed to inflicting suffering. Your loyalty to Ms. Thornton is admirable but misguided. She's abandoned you to save herself. All we need are the satellite restoration codes, and this unpleasantness. And Patterson's vision blurred from the concussion they'd given him during the abduction, but his mind remained sharp enough to recognize the sophisticated nature of his captor. These weren't common criminals. Their equipment, training and resources indicated corporate or foreign intelligence backing. The questions they asked revealed intimate knowledge of the satellite systems and his relationship with Isabel. Even if I gave you the codes, Patterson whispered through swollen lips, You couldn't use them without biometric authentication and geographic positioning confirmations. Isabel designed multiple fail-safes specifically to prevent unauthorized restoration. Gray's smile revealed perfect teeth that somehow made his expression more threatening. Dr. Patterson, you underestimate our resources. We have Ms. Thornton's biometric data from her GSS employment records, and our technical team is quite capable of spoofing geographic confirmation. What we need from you is the algorithmic sequence that bridges the authentication protocols. 20 miles away in GSS's executive boardroom, Marcus Richardson was discovering that corporate power had limits when confronted by federal investigation. FBI agents had arrived with warrants 30 minutes after Elena Rodriguez's article went viral, seizing servers, financial records, and communication logs, despite Victoria Chen's frantic calls to their government liaison. This is harassment based on fabricated allegations from a known terrorist, Richardson declared to Agent Sarah Vance, who'd been assigned to replace Walsh despite his protestations. Isabel Thornton has clearly manipulated evidence to support her extremist narrative. Agent Vance, a veteran of white-collar investigations, remained unmoved by Richardson's bluster. Mr. Richardson, we have financial records showing unexplained transfers totaling $47 million to offshore accounts over the past 8 months. We have communication intercepts proving coordination with foreign entities during sensitive contract negotiations. Your public statements about Ms. Thornton being a terrorist are interesting, but they don't explain these documented facts. Victoria Chen entered the boardroom, her usual composure cracked by the morning's revelations. The article had included financial documents that traced money flows through shell companies she'd personally established. Their foreign partners were demanding explanations while simultaneously distancing themselves from the exposed operation. The warrants are overly broad, Chen declared, though her voice lacked its usual authority. This investigation exceeds federal jurisdiction over corporate communications. Ms. Chen, when corporate communications involve foreign intelligence services and potential treason, federal jurisdiction becomes quite expansive. Agent Vance replied coolly. I suggest you contact your attorneys. Both of you will need them. As federal agents systematically dismantled their corporate fortress, Richardson and Chen exchanged glances that communicated volumes. Their official protection was evaporating. But the private contractors operating under Scorpion Protocol remained active and beyond legal oversight. Elena Rodriguez was learning firsthand about the reach of corporate desperation. Her apartment building had been evacuated due to a gas leak that conveniently occurred immediately after her exposé publication. Standing across the street watching hazmat teams search her home, she recognized the professional nature of the operation. This wasn't accident or coincidence. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your reporting has endangered national security operations. Retract your article and cease investigation, or face consequences for aiding foreign terrorists. This is your only warning. Instead of intimidation, the threat confirmed that her investigation was accurate and damaging. Elena immediately forwarded the message to Agent Walsh and began composing a follow-up article about corporate intimidation tactics. If they wanted to silence her through fear, they'd chosen the wrong target. Agent David Walsh was fighting his own battle within the FBI bureaucracy. His official reassignment had been expedited, but his copies of the financial investigation remained on his personal devices. Standing in his supervisor's office, he faced a choice between career preservation and justice. Walsh, your obsession with this GSS conspiracy theory is damaging Bureau credibility, Supervisor Martin declared. Richardson and Chen are respected business leaders dealing with a terrorist attack by a rogue employee. Your investigation is being used by hostile media to undermine legitimate corporate interests. Sir, with respect, the financial evidence is irrefutable. Richardson and Chen have been selling technical specifications to foreign entities while creating vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. The satellite shutdown prevented a much larger security breach. The satellite shutdown cost the global economy billions and endangered lives worldwide. Thornton is a terrorist, and your attempts to legitimize her actions border on insubordination. Martin's tone carried the finality of bureaucratic decision-making. You have 2 hours to transfer all case materials and report to the Baltimore field office for reassignment. This conversation is over. Walsh left the meeting knowing his FBI career was effectively ended, but his commitment to truth remained intact. Within an hour, he transmitted complete copies of his investigation to congressional oversight committees, inspector general offices, and journalist contacts who could ensure the evidence remained public regardless of bureaucratic suppression. In an undisclosed location, Isabel Thornton was orchestrating the most dangerous operation of her career. Patterson's capture had been anticipated. Their operational security assumed eventual compromise and separation. What she hadn't expected was the psychological impact of knowing her closest ally was suffering while she remained free. The secure communication channel connected her with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who was coordinating with General Hayes to provide military protection for the final phase of evidence revelation. The Pentagon had quietly activated special operations teams to investigate the foreign intelligence connections, treating the corporate conspiracy as a national security threat rather than simple white-collar crime. Isabel, we have confirmation that Richardson and Chen are using private military contractors under something called Scorpion Protocol, Sarah reported from her secure location. These aren't law enforcement personnel. They're operating outside legal constraints with orders to eliminate rather than capture. Then we accelerate the timeline, Isabel replied, her voice steady despite the circumstance. I'm uploading the complete technical documentation to multiple secure servers worldwide. Even if they capture or kill me, the evidence survives and the satellite restoration protocols become public knowledge. As she executed the final data transfer, Isabel reflected on the personal cost of fighting institutional corruption. Her career was destroyed, her reputation demolished, and her closest friend was paying the price for their shared commitment to truth. Yet the alternative, allowing foreign entities permanent access to critical infrastructure, remained unthinkable. Richardson's press conference had been masterfully orchestrated, painting her as a traitor while positioning himself as a patriotic victim. The corporate machinery of spin and influence was formidable, backed by resources that dwarfed anything individual truth-tellers could marshal. But truth had its own power, amplified by Elena's journalistic courage, Walsh's investigative integrity, and the growing alliance of officials willing to prioritize national security over corporate interests. The battle was no longer between Isabel and GSS. It had become a test of whether democratic institutions could overcome corporate corruption backed by foreign influence. The corporate counterstrike was reaching its climax, with Patterson's torture representing the ultimate expression of their desperation and ruthlessness. But Isabel's final gambit was already in motion, and the evidence now existed beyond the reach of corporate suppression or violence. The question remaining was whether Patterson could survive long enough for rescue, and whether Isabel could restore the satellites while exposing the conspiracy that had necessitated their shutdown. The corporate war had become a race against time, with global communications infrastructure hanging in the balance. The GSS headquarters at midnight resembled a fortress under siege. Corporate security had tripled since the FBI raids, with private contractors establishing perimeters that extended 3 blocks in every direction. What they didn't expect was an infiltration team that included a federal agent, a determined journalist, and someone who knew every inch of the building's hidden infrastructure. Isabel crouched in the storm drain beneath the building's foundation, her tablet displaying real-time feeds from security cameras. Patterson had compromised during his initial system penetration. Agent Walsh checked his sidearm one final time, still processing the surreal nature of conducting an unauthorized rescue operation with a supposed terrorist and an investigative reporter. The primary satellite control center is on the 42nd floor, Isabel whispered, studying building schematics she'd helped design years earlier. But they'll be holding James in the sub-basement interrogation facility, a room that officially doesn't exist on any building plan. Elena Rodriguez adjusted her body camera, ensuring every moment would be documented for the exposé that would either vindicate them or serve as evidence of their final actions. How do we know he's still alive? Because they need him alive, Isabel replied grimly. The restoration codes require his biometric signature combined with mine. Killing him serves no purpose until they've extracted what they need. Walsh studied the security patrol patterns through his tactical scope. We have a 15-minute window between guard rotation. Once we're inside, there's no retreat. This building will be locked down tighter than a federal prison. 2 floors above them, Victoria Chen paced the executive conference room where she and Richardson had orchestrated their conspiracy. The walls that once represented corporate power now felt like the closing walls of a trap. FBI seizures had frozen their offshore accounts, foreign partners were severing connections, and government protection had evaporated with embarrassing speed. The contractors are getting nervous, Chen reported, ending a secure call with their Scorpion protocol coordinator. Federal agencies are asking uncomfortable questions about unauthorized paramilitary operations on American soil. We're running out of time and options. Richardson stared at the city lights through bulletproof windows, his corporate empire crumbling with each news cycle. How long until Patterson breaks? Professional interrogators estimate another 6 hours before psychological resistance collapses completely. But we may not have that long. General Hayes has activated military intelligence units to investigate foreign infiltration of satellite networks. They're treating this as potential espionage rather than corporate crime. Then we accelerate everything. Get the restoration codes from Patterson now, using whatever methods necessary. Once we control the satellites again, we can negotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. In the sub-basement, Patterson's consciousness drifted between pain and determination. The interrogators had moved beyond psychological pressure to pharmaceutical enhancement, drugs that amplified pain while maintaining mental clarity, yet his mind remained focused on a single thought. Isabel would come. Their partnership had survived 8 years of corporate politics and technical challenges. It would survive this. Dr. Patterson, Mr. Gray's voice seemed to come from a great distance. Your resistance is admirable but ultimately pointless. Miss Thornton has abandoned you to save herself. Give us the codes, and the pain stops immediately. Through swollen eyes, Patterson studied his captors with the analytical mind that had made him one of the world's premier cybersecurity experts. Their equipment was sophisticated, their methods professional, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the depth of loyalty forged through shared creation of something larger than themselves. Even if I gave you the codes, Patterson whispered, Isabel built quantum encryption into the restoration sequence. Without her physical presence at the primary control terminal, the codes are worthless random numbers. Gray's expression revealed frustration beneath professional composure. Then you'll help us capture her. One call from you, expressing distress and requesting immediate assistance, will bring her directly to us. You don't understand her at all. Patterson managed a broken smile. Isabel doesn't respond to emotional manipulation. She responds to logical necessity. And the logical necessity is exposing your conspiracy, not saving me. 20 floors above, Isabel was proving Patterson's assessment accurate. She moved through GSS's ventilation systems, with the precision of someone who'd designed the building's infrastructure specification. Behind her, Walsh provided tactical support, while Elena documented their progress through the corporate labyrinth. Security checkpoint ahead, Walsh whispered, studying thermal imaging on his tablet. 2 guards, standard corporate security rather than military contract. Isabel activated a device that had been hidden in the building's electrical systems for 3 years, an electromagnetic pulse generator designed to disable specific security sectors without triggering general alarm. The guards' radios died silently, their surveillance cameras went dark and electronic locks defaulted to open positions. Emergency maintenance protocol, Isabel explained quietly. I installed multiple failsafes in case corporate management ever tried to lock me out of my own system. They descended through service corridors that bypassed main security checkpoints, guided by Isabel's intimate knowledge of the building's hidden spaces. At each level she activated additional systems that had been dormant for years, her insurance against exactly this scenario. In the Pentagon's Strategic Communications Center, General Hayes coordinated with international allies. As the satellite crisis entered its 4th day, Dr. Sarah Mitchell provided real-time updates on Isabel's infiltration, while military intelligence units tracked the foreign connections that had been exposed through Elena's reporting. General, we have confirmation that the Chinese intelligence services are attempting to withdraw their operatives from American soil, Colonel Martinez reported. The GSS conspiracy has been compromised beyond recovery, and they're cutting losses rather than risk larger exposure. Hayes studied satellite tracking displays that showed the global impact of the ongoing shutdown. What's our timeline for restoration if Thornton succeeds? Technical estimates suggest 6 to 12 hours for full network recovery, assuming she can access the primary control systems without interference. The quantum encryption she implemented requires her physical presence and biometric authentication. There's no remote solution. And if she fails, Dr. Mitchell answered from her secure connection, then we're looking at weeks or months of systematic reconstruction, assuming we can even identify all the vulnerabilities. Richardson and Chen create. Isabel's the only person who fully understands what she built and how to safely restore it. In the sub-basement, Patterson heard the subtle sounds that indicated building systems responding to commands they hadn't received in years. Emergency lighting activated in sequence, ventilation patterns shifted, and security doors cycled through diagnostic routines. Isabel was in the building. Mr. Gray noticed the changes simultaneously, his professional training recognizing the signs of systematic infiltration. Scorpion Protocol. All units, we have hostile infiltration. Secure the primary asset and prepare for immediate extraction. Too late, Patterson whispered, his voice gaining strength despite his injuries. She's not just infiltrating, she's taking control. You never understood what you were fighting. This isn't just about satellites or corporate espionage. It's about the fundamental question of whether truth can survive when power decides to destroy it. The building's main power flickered as Isabel accessed core systems from within, her fingers dancing across interfaces she'd designed to respond only to her touch. Behind her, Walsh and Elena prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that the next hour would determine whether justice could triumph over institutional corruption. Above them, Richardson and Chen faced the collapse of everything they'd built, while below them, Patterson held on to consciousness through sheer determination to witness their defeat. The final gambit had begun, and there would be no second chances. The primary satellite control center hummed with the energy of systems awakening after days of darkness. Isabel's fingers moved across the quantum encrypted interface with the fluid precision of a conductor leading a symphony, each command restoring another piece of the global communications network. The massive wall displays showed satellite positions shifting from red to amber to green, as connections re-established across 7 continents. Singapore hub coming online, she announced to the secure channel connecting her with General Hayes and Dr. Mitchell. Emergency services restoration in 3 minutes. Behind her, Agent Walsh secured the door while Elena documented everything through her live stream, broadcasting the satellite restoration to millions of viewers worldwide. The narrative Richardson had crafted portraying Isabel as a terrorist crumbled in real time as audiences watched her methodically rebuilding the infrastructure she was accused of destroying. 2 floors below, Patterson limped into the control center supported by the rescue team that had extracted him from the sub-basement facility. His face bore the evidence of professional interrogation, but his eyes remained sharp with the satisfaction of witnessing their conspiracy's final moment. The quantum encryption is accepting dual biometric authentication, Patterson reported, placing his palm on the secondary scanner. All satellite control protocols are now accessible. Richardson and Chen burst through the security doors, flanked by the remaining Scorpion Protocol contractors who'd somehow evaded the building's automated lockdown system. Victoria Chen's usually immaculate appearance showed the strain of the past 4 days, her cold composure replaced by the desperate fury of someone watching everything collapse. "Step away from the controls," Thornton Richardson demanded, his voice cracking with exhaustion and rage. "You've caused enough damage. The global economy has lost trillions because of your terrorist actions." Isabel continued working without looking up, her focus entirely on the restoration sequence. "Marcus, the only damage was what you and Victoria planned to inflict: foreign access to military communication satellites, compromised emergency response networks, backdoors into financial infrastructure. I prevented a catastrophe, not caused one. You're a terrorist," Chen spat, signaling the contractors to advance. "No court will believe your fabricated evidence when you've held the world hostage for 4 days. Elena stepped forward, her camera capturing everything for the global audience. "Actually, no, Chen, the courts will be very interested in the $47 million in offshore accounts, the communication intercepts proving coordination with foreign intelligence services, and the technical documentation showing deliberate vulnerabilities you created in national security infrastructure. Agent Walsh drew his weapon, though the tactical situation remained precarious with multiple armed contractors in the room. Richardson, Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy, treason and espionage. The evidence has been transmitted to every relevant authority. Surrender now and you might avoid federal execution charges. Richardson laughed bitterly. Evidence fabricated by a known terrorist and her accomplice. No jury will convict based on claims by someone who shut down global communications out of personal revenge. Actually, they will. Dr. Mitchell's voice came through the secure channel from her Pentagon because the satellite restoration sequence Isabel is executing includes embedded timestamps and authentication codes that prove she maintained protective control throughout the shutdown. Every major intelligence agency can verify that foreign actors never gained access to the systems because she prevented it. As if to emphasize the point, the final satellite came online, and communications networks worldwide began carrying Elena's live stream. The global audience watched Isabel complete the restoration while simultaneously broadcasting irrefutable evidence of the corporate conspiracy to every major media outlet and government database simultaneously. The beauty of quantum encryption, Patterson said through his injuries, is that it creates an unalterable record of every access attempt and system modification. The forensic evidence proves that Isabel's shutdown was a protective measure, while Richardson and Chen's modifications would have created permanent vulnerabilities. Chen's final gambit was as cold and calculated as everything else she'd orchestrated. Then we all die together, she declared, producing a device that Patterson recognized as an electromagnetic data pulse generator. If we can't control the narrative, we destroy the evidence. Victoria, no. Richardson stepped back, finally understanding the full depths of his partner's ruthlessness. Destroying the control center won't change anything. The evidence is already distributed worldwide. But Chen was beyond rational calculation, her finger hovering over the detonation trigger that would destroy the satellite control systems and likely kill everyone in the room. The woman who had coldly orchestrated corporate treason was preparing to commit mass murder rather than face accountability. Isabel finally looked up from her controls, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her one of the world's premier negotiators. Victoria, that device is connected to the building's power grid, which I've been controlling for the past hour. Your EMP generator is now just an expensive paperweight. As if to demonstrate, the lights in the room shifted to emergency illumination, and Chen's device remained inert despite her desperate attempts to activate it. The building itself had become Isabel's ally, responding to commands embedded in systems Chen had never understood. The Scorpion Protocol contractors, professionals who recognized when a situation became untenable, quietly lowered their weapons and stepped away from their employers. Corporate loyalty had limits when the corporation could no longer pay or protect them. General Hayes's voice crackled through the communication system. Federal agencies are taking Richardson and Chen into custody. The evidence of foreign espionage and treason is overwhelming. They'll spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. As FBI agents flooded the control center to arrest the conspirators, Isabel completed the final satellite restoration sequence. Global communications networks resumed full operation, after 4 days of carefully controlled darkness, carrying the truth of what had really happened to every corner of the world. Elena's reporting would win another Pulitzer Prize, while Agent Walsh found himself leading a new joint task force focused on preventing corporate cybercrime. Dr. Mitchell worked with international partners to create oversight mechanisms, ensuring critical infrastructure couldn't be compromised by corporate greed. But for Isabel, vindication came with profound personal cost. Her career at GSS was finished. Her reputation would always carry the shadow of the shutdown, and she would spend years dealing with the psychological aftermath of choosing justice over stability. Standing in the restored control center watching the global communications network she'd built operate as intended, Isabel felt the weight of responsibility that came with understanding invisible systems that connected the world. Fighting corruption wasn't a single victory. It was an ongoing obligation for those with knowledge and conscience. The dark protocol had ended, but the work of protecting truth against institutional power would continue. Some battles were worth any personal cost, and some principles demanded defense regardless of consequences. In a world where corporate interests and national security had become dangerously misaligned, individuals still possessed the power to choose truth over convenience, justice over comfort. The satellites gleamed overhead, carrying communications that would rebuild trust slowly, message by message, connection by connection. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.